Coping Through the Holidays, Week 5, Coping with Loss, presentation by Teresa M. Brockmeyer and Chelsea Hurt, supervisor with Family Connections. Normally, we do this group presentation with clients, but due to HIPAA laws, we need to pre-record this and do this without any clients due to HIPAA laws of 1996. And terms and understanding loss, bereavement. People cope with grief differently. There is complicated grief and prolonged grief. And then there's traumatic grief when you're not even prepared and then due to disasters. And then there's grief stages. Some people can actually have anger that the person passed. And then some people are in denial that, when the person first passed. And then there's sadness. And then everybody's stages are different. People may experience them all, or they may only experience one or two or all three. And the mourning process takes time and usually takes fully for an average person for up to 2 years. And sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's a lot longer. Sometimes people never get over their loved ones. And then everybody's culture is different for when they accept the death of their loved one and or have different culture as far as the process for this. And then some cultures require them not to do anything for 2 years that is major. And then there's 3 patterns of response. There's death accepting and death defying and death denying. And there could also be difference of bereavement of a loss of a job and loss of a residence and loss of a pet. And any loss is could be detrimental to somebody. They could be very flexible and accept it. The circumstances of loss have major impact on grief. Deaths are unexpected, traumatic, or stigmatized, or even suicide, that can complicate the grieving process. Personal factors such as history of mental illness or strained relationship with deceased can also contribute to difficulties when a person passes. Grief does not have a set time frame. Grief can last for 4 weeks, for months, for years. It can come and go around the holidays in waves and anniversaries and major life events. It might always be in the background of the person's life. However, grief does not tend to lessen the intensity over time. Grief may contribute to other problems. Grief can increase the risk of developing other health problems such as mental illness, relationship difficulties, and this is especially true if the death was traumatic. And if you feel guilt about the death or if the grief is prolonged, it's okay to seek help. Support from family and friends can prevent grief from growing out of control. Although grief will improve over time for most, it isn't always the case. The grieving process. Normal grief varies between cultures and people and nations, as we spoke about. And then grief is a natural process, and it doesn't always require treatment. About 10% of people develop complicated grief after a loss. And then complicated grief can be treated with psychotherapy. Acute grief immediately after a loss and for months afterwards, it's normal to have intense symptoms of shock, distress, sadness, poor appetite, sleeping trouble, and poor concentration. These symptoms will slowly diminish with the passage of time. Complicated grief. Sometimes the symptoms of acute grief never seem to go away. They can last for years, and the loss of a loved one continues to feel unreal and unmanageable. You might constantly yearn for the deceased or experience guilt about the idea of moving on and accepting the loss. And integrated grief, after resolving most of the intense symptoms of acute complicated grief, you will learn to enter the lifelong stage of integrated grief. At this point, you will come to accept the reality of the loss. You resume normal life activities. This doesn't mean that you'll miss the loved one any less. This means you don't feel pain in their memory. You just learn how to cope. And acute grief may show itself again in waves around the holidays, anniversaries, and other reminders. Death of a spouse, one of the most emotionally stressful and disruptive events in life. There's more widows than widowers, and losses due to caregiving also can affect, if you were caring for a parent or a grandparent, and that can also death of a child, perhaps the ultimate loss for a person to endure, regardless of the age of the child. This could be due to a sickness or by suicide. Bereavement in childhood, toddlers, and primary school age children, and middle school age children, and intervention and treatment. There can be many different stages of a child's life where they may get a disease or accident or anything. And it will be so devastating for parents to process that. And then bereavement in adolescence, the value of connectedness and the intervention and treatment, because sometimes it can be even due to suicide, and that can affect us all. Bereavement in the elderly present more somatic problems and psychological problems. There's no indication the intensity of grief varies with age, and we may be even prepared years ahead of time of somebody's death. And then, you know, we don't know how we're going to react until after it. And then people tend to be lonelier and have far longer periods of loneliness than younger people if you're elderly. And if you're in a nursing home, then you can see your friends pass. And then if you live a long life, my grandma's friend is 105. She's seen a lot of people pass in the nursing home this past year. And she had a birthday just recently at 105, and she still walks. And, we're as young as we feel, but if you're elderly and you lose people, that can have an effect on you not thriving. If you have a person in the family that had a long-term sickness, then you know that is imminent, but it's still hard. And then there's other types of losses too, even job losses. Okay, so if someone had a job most of their life and then they were terminated, that can have a severe impact on their life. Even separation and divorce. And if the other person wasn't expecting it, or even if they were, that is a loss of the way they lived and where they lived might be. And there's a lot to that that could almost be like as if the person had passed. And then death of a pet. When our animals pass, it's like a family member. And if someone was really close to their pet and then their animal died, console them, because that's grief too. And then there's the complicated grief again, and then the traumatic grief for, like let's say a person was in a car accident and they didn't expect it, or an instant, you know, death by homicide or even suicide. And that can be um, traumatic grief. And clues to identity complicated grief reactions. And that's when the person cannot function, and or they do not go on with their lives, and or um, can go on with other relationships. And then it's good to have an empathetic presence, being there for people that are grieving, and then have gentle conversations and, you know, be there and have them talk about it when they're able to. And even when we do counseling, we allow them to talk about what that bothers them, or we initiate what the positive moments of a person's life were that had an impact. But anything, about having them talk about the person that passed that they're grieving, we allow room for that and safe place for that. And then providing available space is definitely and important, allowing for them to talk, and then trust, and then know that you're there for them. And this is for counseling purposes, and just educational. And it's models where the griever sometimes confronts and sometimes avoids the stressors of orientations. And then the adaptive model being effective, and then the behavioral and cognitive to make them think more positive. And making lemonade, the positive traumatic growth, potential for positive change present in every crisis situation, and changing the intrusive rumination about a trauma that might have led to the death. And sometimes people feel guilty that they could have done more for the person, especially if they had a long um, sickness and death. And then processing the meaning about a loss, and works for clients and crisis workers, and to actually um, look at the positives of things. Because even counselors, when we do grief counseling, we're humans too. We can feel the empathy, and we're there for you. And if the grief is complicated, or if you just want to get through your coping with loss a little bit more, we are here for you in Council Bluffs and Glenwood and Red Oak and Woodbine and Avoca and Plattsmouth. And we are Family Connections, and we have counselors, and then we have counselors for all ages. And then we also have BS services for children for learning skills. And if you need us, we are here. And thank you for listening to my presentation.